Hey, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Today we're going to work on a viewer's reel, and we're going to talk about a couple of things. So normally a reel will come in to me for servicing, whether it's by mail or somebody will bring it in. And normally it's a reel similar to the Senator 4.0 here that seems to be working, just has some accumulated corrosion on it, probably needs to be cleaned up inside. But every now and then one shows up, not quite like that, and that's the case here. We have a 330 that came in. The viewer took it apart and hasn't been able to put it back together, so I've got a reel, I've got a bag of parts, and I've got a partial assembly in here, as well as some things that aren't quite on right, like the free spool release that isn't working here. So let's use this as a learning experience here. It's not uncommon to take a reel apart and lose track of what's in the reel or on the reel. That's not unusual at all. So let's just say this is you and not the viewer who sent it in, and what do? So the first thing you need to do is take an inventory. A lot of times you'll get in this situation because you've taken the reel apart, you've laid your parts out on a table somewhere, you realize that there was a broken part, you went and ordered it, and it took a week or 2 or 3 for that part to come in, and when that part came in you came back and you lost your position. You were relying on your memory, and unfortunately your memory may not have served you well. So you sit there and you become lost. So what do? So the first thing we do is we go back to the start and we take an inventory of the pieces and the parts. Now, how do you know what the pieces and the parts are? You go out and you get the schematic, and this one's available from mysticparts.com. It has the schematics for most Penn reels. In this case, this is the 330 GTI. You read from the badge, and it'll show you an exploded diagram of where all the pieces and the parts are, and it'll also give you a listing in case any of those are missing. You can actually use this as a checklist. I won't actually go down and check each one of these off, but you'll have a checklist there, and you'll know if you have the full assembly or not. So I have enough of a knowledge of this reel to be dangerous, so I'm going to kind of just do a mental inventory of this. But I took the side plate screw out to find out what we have underneath here. And what we have underneath here, we have the eccentric with the lever release, the free spool lever release on, but we don't have the spring, so we're going to have to go find that spring. So it's a good time to just kind of dump parts into a tray, what's been included here, and see if we have that spring in here. And we do. We have that spring. This is the spring, so we'll be able to reinstall that, so that's a good thing. And then we have the bridge for the most part here, and it looks like the bridge is complete. We do have the anti-reverse dog and the anti-reverse dog spring. We have the yoke and the spool gear. We have the jack. We have the main gear assembly. We're going to take all of this apart just to show you how to service the reel while we are at it. But it seems like we have a full complement of the drag washers and associated pieces. And here's your dog and dog spring. And that's what always concerns me when somebody sends the reels, and I'm always afraid these little springs and that go shooting somewhere. But in this case we have that, so that's good. So we'll clean this up. We'll show you how to service this. And then let's find out what the other miscellaneous parts are in here then. So we have a spool adjuster. That spool adjuster just simply goes on the side of the reel here. Put that back on. I'm just checking as I'm putting that back on to see if there was a spring in there as well. There is no spring on that. Okay, so we're all right with that. The handle, the reel seat clamp, the star adjuster, the bottom pieces for the reel seat tie down. We have 2 of those. So I'll make sure we put those back on. We have the cap washer that sits on top of the drag stack. We have the bridge screws, the side plate screws, the yoke screws. I'm looking here, I think we did have a spring in there. I guess we did. All right. I was thinking it was a little bit unusual to not have a spring in that cap. Let's go ahead and put that spring in then, while we're on camera here. All right, so the first thing you do then is an inventory. And then the second thing you do is you work in pieces. And you've seen me take the reels apart and put them, service them and put them back together numerous times if you've been subscribing to the channel. If this is your first time, that's fine. Understand that there's a step-by-step process here, both of disassembly, cleaning, and then reassembly. And usually the reassembly is nothing more than a reversing of the process to take them apart. Well, we're working on this right now because we've got it apart. Some of the stuff hasn't cleaned, and we're going to put it back together again. So let's start by putting that eccentric in here. So the eccentric is going to control the free spool release. It's made up of a spring, the eccentric, and the free spool lever on the other side. The spring goes into the eccentric from underneath. It lodges in this little wing here, rolls over and gets placed into it, and then it has to turn. Sometimes you can do this by hand, sometimes you can't. There you go. This one was turned by hand to set so that it's at the high point, and now you can put your free spool lever on. Now what happens is a lot of times folks will try and put that on and it doesn't clear, and so they reverse it, which is how we got stuck here before. So I'm going to take the ring first, put that in, and then you need to find a balance. So you take that lever that's turned that way and you just move it to the point where it holds, like right there. You flip the lever around, and then you grab your little nut and washer and you can reset this. Okay, so there you go. We have an eccentric and free spool release lever that's working properly now. So next up, let's do the service on the bridge. It requires a cleaning. First thing you want to do is take the pinion gear off, because with everything that came off of this, the pinion gear sleeve did not. And that's held in by a pin. I'm just trying to push the pin through. Sometimes you can push it through just by some hand strength. Sometimes it requires a little tapping. I use a dead blow hammer when that's the case. When I'm off camera, I apologize for that. But I'm trying to find the flat place to balance this so that I can do that. And you'll see when you tap it out that you can tap the pin out, and then you want to grab that pin and pull it the rest of the way. Now just make sure you grab it firm, but don't go rocking it around too much, because you want to get this back in, and if you use the pliers and hold it too tight, you're going to flare out the end of this pin, and it's going to be difficult to put that back in. So I'm just going to lay that back in the parts tray again, where all those other pieces were, so that I know where to find it after we're done with the service. When that pin is out, you can simply slide the gear sleeve off. You'll see we have some accumulated grease and dried stuff in there. I'm just going to do a quick shot with some penetrating oil to loosen that up a little bit. Come back with a paper towel. Should be good enough to clean this off. I'm not noticing any severe corrosion or that. Just a little congealed grease. Take it off the slot, the shaft as well. And this top slot is where that pin rides. That's why this can't come off with that pin in it. It's going to be sitting in that groove there. So we've done that. We can put a little bit of blue grease on there then. I'm going to use the Penn Precision Reel Grease for this. This happens to be a Penn reel, so nobody usually asks me questions about it, but that grease can work on any fishing reel. It's designed for fishing reel type of environments, water resistance and slip and slide and so on. And don't be afraid to go ahead and use that somewhere else, as long as it's on a fishing reel. Don't use general purpose greases. That's a general recommendation that I make. I prefer that you use a fishing reel grease as I do. They're not expensive, and they're designed for the application, and it just makes a whole lot of sense to go ahead and do that. I'm going to use my dead blow hammer to tap that pin back in now. And from experience, you need to make sure that this section of the pin right here clears this ridge. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to get the gear on. So sometimes you have to just bend it a little bit to the side, and that should work fine. Okay, our gears. Just coming back to our, at least we should have a hard washer here. I'm not seeing the hard washer. I think what I'm seeing is an extra drag washer, which is okay. So let's lay this out then. You're going to have the main gear, a drag washer, a round gear, a drag washer, the first of the eared washers. You're going to have the next set of washers. This uses a multi-stack. Okay, so we have a set here. We don't have an extra washer. Oh, the hard washer's on here. Silly me, just overlooking it. That's the hard washer I was looking for. Okay, with that then we can put the main gear back on. I like to use Cal's Universal Drag Grease for these fabric washers, so we're going to go ahead and do that. These washers are in good condition, so there's no problem with just putting these on. I use my gloved hand, it's a latex glove, to just kind of work that grease around. If there was any excess, you just want a little coating on that, but if there's any excess, you can wipe that off with a paper towel. And as I mentioned, first one up is the round washer. And if you have any questions, you can see they will show you on this diagram that you have the two eared washers that sit next. Again, we'll do that again. We're going to do that 5 times or 6 times, whatever the number of washers is here. And then it's the first of the eared washers goes on. Do that again. And we're doing this live time, that's why you don't see anything speeded up or that, but that's okay, there's no rush here either. Alright, do it again. Second of the eared washers now. You don't have to put the grease on the washers and the eared washers or the metal washers. They'll rub off between them. The idea of the grease is to keep these washers flexible so that they don't dry out. It's not necessarily because of the need to slip or slide in the drag stacks. Alright, and then that little cap washer which came out of our parts basket as well. Alright then, so now we're back over here to the main gear. We did the main gear. Here's your spool gear. Here's your yoke. It's got some accumulated stuff on that, so let's get that off. Some older grease. Here's your yoke. We'll do that as well. And we'll go back to the blue grease now. I'm going to put a little bit of grease onto the yoke. So what you're seeing then, you're seeing that you know, we got out of sorts here with the pieces and parts, lost our way in terms of putting it back together, became intimidated or something. But the solution was pretty easy. You go out and you get the schematic, you look it over. If you've had experience with the reel itself, then it makes it a little bit easier for you in terms of trying to figure out how the pieces and parts go back together, but the exploded diagram is usually a pretty good one. And that's what we're showing you now. I'm going to put a little bit of the grease up on top on that eccentric. I'm going to take the 2 springs for the yoke. They sit in the cavities. We're going to take the yoke and spool gear. Now on the spool gear there's 2 sides. There's an indented side that has a U-channel and has a flat side. The indented side always faces the spool. And then we're going to set that up just like this. That's the way that this rides. Next step then, we're going to get ready for that anti-reverse. Now there's 4 bridge screws. There's 2 that have partial threads. This is a partial thread. There are two that have full threads. The full threads go on the bottom. So I'm going to kind of put the two that have the partial threads, I'm going to put them up and try and hold these. It'll just hold it in place a little bit easier. It's not easy. You got a lot of your fingers doing different things here. But you'll notice I put the two screws in here. Those are the partial threads. And then we're going to grab the main gear. We're going to want to start this. We're going to want to put the anti-reverse in. We're going to bring that all the way up. And we're going to come around so that we can clear that anti-reverse. And actually I think what we want to do is get the metal gear in first. Like that. Bring that halfway up. Now we can put the anti-reverse in. Still trying to hold all of the other ones. And then we can flip this all the way around so that we can seat the reel. And right now that spool gear is just a little bit off, so I'm working on that right now. And then you want to line up. There's two plastic studs that sits on. And now, while I'm still trying to hold all of these, if you will, I'm going to just tighten the first one, which has got the anti-reverse to it. And I'm going to come over to the top and try and set that one. And I see that the yoke is just a little bit off there, so we're just going to grab my little punch. There we go. You can generally hear a click, make those work. Get that one started. Go back over to the other side. I go northeast, southwest on these just to make sure I have balance when I'm reinstalling the bottoms, the bridges, so that there's no unusual torsion in these things. And once you do that, then you can set all of these up, tighten them back in. So that's how all the pieces and parts, for the most part, came out of this reel. That's how we've gone ahead and serviced it. And now we're going to go put it back together again. We're going to service the bearing here. You have a bearing here. You want to use oil on your bearings. Just find my oil for a moment. I'm going to use a Real-X oil. Just flood that bearing. I'm going to pull the spool here because there's a bearing in the back. So let's go ahead and get that bearing, do the same thing there, flood that bearing. We have an idler gear there that's going to be driving the level line guide. So we're going to want to put a little bit of grease onto that. And then we're going to want to come to the gear side now. That's going to be driving that line guide idler, so you want to put a little bit of grease there and a little bit of grease onto the spool shaft on both sides. With that done, we can come back while I have the spool out and put these two rod holders in. It's always easy to do it this way than try and work around that spool. And then again, just with your fingers like you were doing before, just hold those two in. Go for the rod set. Grab those little sleeves. And you don't have to tighten these all the way down, but you want to make sure that all the pieces are in the right place. So that's kind of what we're doing right now, and it's easier to do with the spool out. Okay, got that out. We have this greased up. Have the back of the spool with a little bit of grease on it. And put this back in. I'm having a little bit of trouble here, but I am. Click may be getting in the way. That's it. The click was in the way when we were doing that, so now we're back okay. Alrighty, so then last part here, then I'm going to put a drop of oil just where that worm gear is. Not that it's really needed, but I like to keep these parts fresh there. If I put that oil on it and need to come back later and do that, then remove that, then I'm not sure it's not going to seize. Next up then is the side plate. I'm going to merge these. We have 4 side plate screws. We have 5 side plate screws. They all appear to be the same size. Again, I didn't take these out. These came in a package, so we're kind of going, but sometimes those side plate screws are different, particularly like on a Long Beach reel, where you have a different reel seat. You'll have a smaller screws for the bottom. Okay, some folks like to put a little bit of oil onto the screws here, particularly if you have a saltwater application. You can go ahead and do that. These are going into a graphite frame. They're not going into metal posts like the Long Beach, so I'm not as concerned with that. And you know, again, you can do it if you want to do it as a practice, but I don't think they're needed here. We're almost done with this. We'll just service the pawl after we get done with this, and that's how you do it. So you look at the schematic, you find out how the reel goes in burst diagram, you go and find all of the pieces and parts and make sure they are all here. Oops, and as I'm doing this, I'm just thinking to myself, I didn't set the anti-reverse spring. There you go. Got ahead of myself. I would have done that on a test. Let's just go ahead and do that right now, otherwise we're going to have to take it apart later. So, as I mentioned, this is rarely edited. This is real time, so you get to see what we all know. We're all human. We all get ahead of ourselves sometimes, and that's what's going on here. So let's go ahead and put that spring back on the anti-reverse. Spent so much time telling you how to get that anti-reverse in that I forgot to take the time to show you where that spring goes. Alright, so here's your spring. It belongs on this post here. I use that little pin again. I like to hold my finger over it just in case that spring wants to come off. Just drop it on like that, then give it a turn to make sure that it's working. There you go. Alright, so now we can come back and reinstall the side plate. Just line the notches up. And to that point there, with something going on in the spool, don't force anything. If it doesn't feel right, don't try to use brute force to make it right. It rarely works, and usually what it does is it just causes more problems. Alright, and we can just kind of reposition these again. And you'll notice I'm going to do the same thing I did with those bridge screws. I'm going to go north, south, east and west. I don't want this side plate binding as I go to reinstall the assembly. So that's kind of east. We'll come back to another one on the bottom here. We'll go back up top. And then we'll go over and we'll service that pawl, and we'll get done with this reel. And Mike will have a reel to go fishing with again. Alrighty, one more screw to go. Take your time, there's no races here. I mean, I know I try to sometimes speed things up here because I got a video and I know everybody's viewers' time is precious. So I do try to kind of go quickly, and sometimes going quickly leads to things like not putting the anti-reverse spring back on. So kind of gets you. Alright, the furrow goes over the gear sleeve. The star drag. Okay, just tighten down the the star drag adjuster then, and we go for the handle. Now if we didn't put the blue grease onto the gear sleeve by removing that, this would be a good time to go ahead and put the grease in there, or put the oil in there. But since we have grease in there, there's no need to do that. We'll grab the handle. We'll take the handle screw. I like to thread these by hand. Tighten it up, and then of course it's the bigger nut. The handle screw has the same nut as the 6.0 Senator, so use the bigger one as opposed to the smaller one. And then we're going to go for the little lockdown screw. And you want to make sure when you put this nut in that you keep the groove lined up so that you can put that set screw in there. Tighten that down. Give this a turn. It's working. Last thing we need to do then, just put a drop of oil in the pawl. And you don't have to pull anything off for that. I'm going to put it right under here, and then I'm going to just put a little bit of oil on the worm gear, and then that'll seep into the pawl without having to do any of that work. Okay, so then we'll just flip it. We'll give it a test. It's running fine. Throw it back. Make sure that the drags are holding. They are. So that's it. That's how you take a reel, whether it's the Penn 330 GTI or another one that happens to have lost its way and is in pieces. Go in there, grab the schematic, whatever the reel is, get a picture of how the reel comes back together, understand where the parts are so that you could use a checklist on this, and if you needed to, just cross the parts off or do a mental inventory as I did there. And then you're on your way. With a little patience and a little knowledge, you can put that reel back together and get it going fishing again. So I hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope this has given you some tips on how to work on your own reels. And if you like it, please indicate that. Please subscribe. We're always looking for subscribers. And with that, I wish you great fishing. This is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Thank you for watching.